I thought I'd start maybe with a little bit about myself. Obviously, I'm Australian. Been working in the industry maybe about 13, almost 14 years now. A lot of terminal server Citrix type stuff, but generally also fill that in with Active Directory, group policy, application, desktop deployment, quite a bit of everything. For the past 9 months, I've been working at Transport for London. I'm a contractor there, and I've been working on the soft-grid deployment, taking all their apps and repackaging them up in soft-grid and deploying all those. Transport for London is going through a pretty big infrastructure upgrade at the moment. None of the mission-critical stuff, so don't ask me why, about the trains and why they don't run on time, anything like that. So what we've been doing is we've been looking at about 500 apps, deploying these to about 12,000 users, I think it is. Go live date was today, and I've just come back from two weeks holiday, so I've left just at the right time. But today went quite well. No big complaints. I don't think we've had any apps that we had to go through and touch up, but we've got a few little bits and pieces that we've got to work through. Not all of our apps are virtualized. We're not putting everything through SoftGrid, and I'll go through a bit of that as I get through this. Now I'm talking about Microsoft Application Virtualization. SoftGrid is the old name. Microsoft Application Virtualization is the new name. And in my demos, I'm using the 4.5 beta, so hopefully everything should go right. Just cross my fingers. So how many IT pros actually in the room? So we're outnumbered by the devs, hey? Hopefully there'll be a little bit of stuff in this for the developers as well, because it is applications, and I guess it's a bit of a change in how we deploy apps, and it does. When we're doing this kind of stuff, we do have to interact with developers, which is always fun. So I'll apologise now if I say something that offends the developers. Being an IT pro, I have a love-hate relationship with you guys. So what is application virtualization? I'll just go through a few basics and hopefully give you an idea of what this stuff does. Microsoft isn't the only one doing this kind of stuff, and hopefully with a little bit of time at the end I'll show you a few of the others and some of these that I think are quite cool. They've all got their advantages and disadvantages. SoftGrid's probably the best one of the bunch. So if we have a look at standard applications, we all know what they are. We run setup.exe, we install everything on the box. So we might need to install .NET Framework or the Java runtime to run an application. We install the application on top of that, all gets tattooed in the registry, registering DLLs, file system, all that stuff. And as we know with Windows apps, they're not easy we can't just pick them up and move them across to another box to run. And we should all know what OS virtualization is. So we're looking at VMware, Microsoft Hyper-V. So basically we're virtualizing the hardware, and we put the OS inside that, and then we do everything inside that we would do on normal hardware. And application virtualization probably lives somewhere in between this. So what we do is we are actually running all of our apps directly on the hardware, but we're bundling everything up, all the dependencies, so .NET, Java runtime, all the little bits and pieces that we might need for that application. We're bubbling them up into a bubble, and we can then take those applications and just drop them onto the machine and execute them without having to do an install. So any questions there? Anyone, if you've got any questions, just let me know. So as I said, we're running everything. Everything's running on the box, but we're virtualizing all our registry and file system access so that we can take that application and execute it anywhere. And one of the benefits of this too is that we can, because we don't have to install the app, we can get rapid deployment and get that application out there.
Your questions, okay. I can understand the first one, where it's just the applications with the separate bits. I can understand the last one, where everything is virtualized down at the metal almost.
Yep.
But what's the this middle one? Why is
Let me go back a slide. I stole this slide from someone else. This is not my slide. I can't take credit for this one. What I'm trying to get across here is that even though we're virtualizing these applications and they're inside a bubble and they're self-contained, everything that happens within that application, so when it runs, when a user makes changes, so makes a setting to the application, or the setting writes something to the application data directory, things like that, they all stay self-contained, and the resources for that application are also self-contained inside that bubble. But they're using...
What's the benefit of that as against the one on the right-hand side?
Well, the one on the right-hand side is very different. We could actually team the two. So we might use OS virtualization for VDI, for instance. So we can take virtual desktops, which we might deliver. And that's what we're doing at TFL. We're using VDI to deliver desktops to developers. So we can give developers a locked-down desktop, but their development environment happens inside a VM that they can do anything inside of. So the whole OS and all the applications that are inside that, we can pick that up and run that on any hardware, and it's independent of the hardware. With the application virtualization, where I can run that application anywhere, so that could be on native hardware, or that could be inside a VM, an OS virtualization. Does that make sense?
Well, I won't push the matter, but I still don't see what the benefit of that is.
Well, I've got some demos, and hopefully that'll become a bit clearer with those demos. So why would we virtualize? Compatibility. When we might have applications that we can't run side by side. So Microsoft Office is a good example. We might have a whole heap of databases out there that need to use Access 97, Access 2000, 2002, and typically we can't run those applications on the same box at the same time. But if we bundle those up in SoftGrid, we can all run them on the same box. The user can go and open up the application that they need to use. Another good thing here is who's seen an application that badly written that needs admin rights to run on the box properly? Rights to program files, rights to the Windows directory, things like that. When we virtualize an application up, we're also virtualizing any file system rights that happen in there. So if we have an application that wants to write to the Windows directory, we can allow that, but it's not actually happening to the real operating system. It's happening self-contained inside the bubble, and the application is fooled into thinking that the write was a success. And this probably leads on a bit to regression testing. If we've got multiple versions of applications and multiple dependencies, we might have operating system dependencies, things like that. Because we can bundle up everything inside that application that is required for that app, so all the dependencies, any OS-specific bits and pieces that might be in the application, we can reduce our regression testing time because we're not running everything natively. We can take that application and we know it'll run the same as it would do on Windows 2000, Windows XP, Windows Vista, and so on. We can reduce our terminal server silos. Everyone familiar with what terminal server Citrix type stuff does? What has happened in the past is when we've had application conflicts, we've had to have a set of terminal servers that run our main desktops, might run Office and a few bits and pieces, but if we've got an application that has issues running with some other application, we generally silo those out only to a certain number of boxes and run that app only on those boxes. With application virtualization, we don't have to worry about those interdependencies and conflicts with other apps, so we can reduce those silos, reduce that management overhead, and get a bit more out of our terminal servers. We can reduce our deployment time. Normally, if you're deploying apps with SMS or group policy, you've got to wait for the application to be deployed by the agent on the box, or if it's group policy, the machine has to be restarted. With the application virtualization products, they're generally aimed or deployed to the user. So I'll demonstrate this a bit later on, but we can say this group of users needs this app. As soon as they log in, they'll have the shortcut there. Click on the shortcut, and the application will be delivered to them. We don't have to wait for our deployment system to kick in and deliver that app. Upgrades. One of the really cool things, and I'll show you this, is we can upgrade applications on the fly. So SoftGrid actually supports, say we've got application X and it's version 1. I can upgrade that application while it's in use. What happens is the user closes the application. As soon as they reopen it, they've got version 2. And I can also do rollback. So if that version is no good, I can turn that version off. They'll close the application, open it back up again, and straight away it's version 1. So in a legacy type environments, if we had to do rollback, that's a real pain in the bum. So this has some really very interesting applications for application deployments and upgrade and downgrade if we need to. Migrations, going from Windows XP to Windows Vista. I'll demonstrate this. It'll be a bit clearer when I do a demo. But with the SoftGrid client, when you run an application and it writes registry changes or any changes that would be inside your application data folder, they're not actually written to the physical file system. They're written to, a package file, and I can store that on the network. So I can, rather than having to migrate my profiles and all my settings from one OS to the next OS, those user settings, because they're not tied to the user profile, they can be picked up straight away on the new OS. And because, as I touched on with compatibility, because the dependencies and everything that's required for that application is separated from the OS, I can, with confidence, most of the time, I can move those virtualized applications to the new OS, and I know that they're going to execute exactly the same way as they did on the old OS. Business continuity. This one's pretty cool. If we have a remote site that our primary site goes down, we have a remote site with just bare minimum machines. Because these applications are generally deployed to the users, I don't need to have any of the apps installed on the box as soon as the user logs into the machine and goes to run it. I can replicate my infrastructure at my remote site. Don't have to install any of my apps. As soon as the user logs in and clicks on their application, the application will be streamed to their machine and they can execute it straight away. So what is SoftGrid? SoftGrid, I guess, in the context of a few of the other application virtualization tools around, they all take a slightly different approach. They generally have a client, they have a packaging tool, and a server that you deploy the software from. So the SoftGrid has what they call a sequencer. If anyone's done MSI packaging before, where you do a capture before and after, this essentially, you do your software install, and it looks at the changes that your setup routine does, and then packages all those up and creates the application package for you that you can deploy. We have a virtual application server. Now this is the streaming server. This when the client connects to the virtual application server over HTTP or RTSP, which is your real-time streaming protocol. With HTTP, it means that we could actually deploy applications over the internet. So if we've got a laptop that's out on the road somewhere, we need to deploy a new application to that. As long as you've got nice fat bandwidth, we could deploy that application to that laptop. Just enable the application, the user would see the refresh, see the new icon, and stream it down, and away they go. And of course a client. In SoftGrid, this is a kernel mode driver plus a few other little bits and pieces that do all the magic for us. Does all the file system and registry redirection. SoftGrid take a slightly different approach to some of the others. At the core of it, they've all got file system and registry redirection. So essentially that's, here's a file in one location, redirect that to make it look like it's in the right location where it should actually exist. The SoftGrid, in addition to that, they have a client or SoftGrid drive, so we don't actually have to do any file system redirection. So if we've got really large applications, and some of these, we've got some apps that are about 1.3 gig, or if you do maybe something like SAP, which is just absolutely enormous, there's going to be quite a bit of a, well, there can be a bit of a performance hit on your file system redirection. So with our client drive, because there is no redirection happening in place there, we should be a little bit faster. And I think this is one of the reasons why I think the SoftGrid stuff is pretty good. All right, this is my demo environment. I've got 6 machines running here at the moment. I know there's only 5 on the screen there. So this might be a little bit slow, but we'll see how we go. I've got a self-contained environment here, so I've got a domain controller because we need authentication. Windows Terminal Server, Windows XP and Windows Vista clients. With your terminals, there's 2 different clients, one for Terminal Server, one for desktops. And there's some slight differences between those, but in effect they execute the applications exactly the same way. And a virtual application server that I can stream my applications from. And I've also got a sequencing box, and I'll look at sequencing an application and show you how that works. So let's dig in here. All right, this is my Vista client, and I've got a little MMC tool that I can use to modify the client properties. I can look at the applications that are deployed to this machine. I can handle file type associations. So if, just the same as I've got applications that install locally to the box, I've got to handle file type associations somehow. And I can configure what the virtual application server is. So in this case, I've got this box called VAS, and I'm using RTSP. RTSP. I could use HTTP or anything like that. Now, one of the things that the SoftGrid client does is we have a user. Every user's got a location that application data application data information would be written to. Get this to work. Okay, this user data directory folder here. Normally this gets stored in my user profile, but because I'm sharing this between 2 OSs, and I'll show you how I can migrate essentially between 2 OSs and have all these settings follow me. I'm writing this to the network, so this information is always on the network. If anyone's handling roaming user profiles, you've got generally profiles can be quite big. Because essentially what I'm doing, I'm redirecting application data folder for the SoftGrid client to the network. If you've ever looked at redirecting application data folder through group policy or something like that, you're setting yourself up for all sorts of headaches. It's not a good thing. But with the SoftGrid stuff, because it's all on the network, this is available to me wherever I log on, and it doesn't have to follow me around inside my roaming user profile, and we keep our user logons a little bit quicker. I've got, this is my SoftGrid drive where my applications are actually going to be stored on. This is a virtual drive. When you install the client, this drive appears, and this is actually mapped into, this is the common SoftGrid client area. There's this cache file here. So all the applications all the application bubbles that are downloaded into the box, they're stored inside the cache on the machine, so they're always available to the user. They can be available online or offline, so we've got laptop users, we need to make sure that these apps are available to them when they're away from the network. And on my home drive, because I've used this home path folder, I get this off-grid client folder. So inside of that, instead of seeing application data / Microsoft / Office and all the bits and pieces that would be inside that and the registry settings, they're stored inside a single file. And because it's on the network, this stuff will follow me around. I'll just flick over to my virtual application server, and it's just an MMC, nothing terribly exciting in here. But what I'll do, I've got some applications already imported in here. I won't bore you through how that works. But what I'll go and do is enable Dreamweaver, and if I look at my Vista client, I've got my ASPX file over here. And I can enable this. Just flick back to my client. Normally refresh happens at login, so when the user logs in, the client reads what applications they have access to, downloads all the icons and what's required. I'll just go and refresh my applications. Now with Dreamweaver, there's a whole heap of file types that happen inside here. Now because this is deployed to the user, those file types are per user, they're not per machine. So I can have different users having different default file types. So I might have Dreamweaver for one user and front page for another user, things like that. So now that file type's kicked in, the icon's changed, and I can go and launch Dreamweaver.
Is that downloading now?
I've already got this application cached, but I'll show you one that actually comes, that should be probably not on the machine, I hope. Actually, I'll just go and make sure it's not on the box. And there we go. So there's Dreamweaver. Now it's executing locally. I've got access to all my local resources. I can go and save something inside my documents folder when it comes available. I can do the opposite here as well. Can everyone see that? Is that too small? If I have an application and I'm retiring that application, it's as easy as just disabling that application. As soon as the user closes that app and a refresh happens, the application will be unavailable for the user. So you see there the file type associations have disappeared and the application is no longer available for the user.
You said you have the application cached in the machine. Is the user able to therefore somehow enable that?
No. No, there are I'm running this MMC as an admin, but there's different permissions that you can set for the user. So you could do if you wanted to, but in this case, no, the user can't go and run that. Can't go and run that or re-enable that application. What I'll do with Adobe Reader 8, this should be an application that I've just deleted it off that machine. It's not cached on the machine, so I'll enable this and we'll see it stream down. It's just a progress bar that's going to go across the screen. So I'll flick back over to my Vista client. I've got a PDF here. So if I refresh that, there's my PDF. Now I'll go and open that up. So you just get a little progress bar that goes across. So I'll show you in a second. I want to show you the sequencer. With large applications, what we can do with those apps is we can tell the sequencer we only want to get enough of the application down to get the application up and running. So in the case of Adobe Reader, it's probably a little bit small, but something like Adobe Photoshop, which is a very, very big application, it's about 1.2 gig. There might only actually be about 300 meg of that application that is actually required to get that up and running. We can cache only that first 300 meg, and that first 300 meg will stream. And then as the application, or then as the user is using the application and more bits are required, it will stream all that stuff down in the background. So we only get to what's needed.
Is there any support for install from media kind of thing, like you can ship it offline, the application?
Yes and no. Not with this setup. This setup really requires the server in the back end. But if you team this with SMS or config manager, then yes, you could do. I'll talk a little bit about config manager R2 after the demo. Alright, so I got Adobe Reader there. So nice and quick, didn't have Adobe Reader installed, just enable it, user starts it up, streams down and away we go. And if my demo is going to work properly, I'll just go in here and change a preference and flick over to my XP machine. So I'll just change this units in here to millimeters, click OK, and close that down. Now if I flick it back over to my XP client, normally this refresh, as I said, happens on logon, but I'm just forcing the refresh here. There we go. Again, this application is going to stream down. This one's doing 100% because of the way I've set it up. And takes a little bit of time. First run generally seems to be a little bit slower than, because it's got to be cached down the first time. It's all got to set all the environment up. Subsequent runs are a little bit quicker than this.
So in terms of patching, you only ever patch your one application, you moved over and pushed it out to the
Yeah, well because the apps aren't on the box, you won't be able to run the patcher because it won't detect anything. And if I can show you this, there we go. So there's my migration between OSs. I don't have any roaming profiles or anything like that. All I'm sharing between these two boxes is my SoftGrid client user area is on my home drive. So just like my Vista box, when it comes up, I've got my SoftGrid client area on here. This Adobe Reader one happens to be this one inside that, and so those settings will follow the machines, and this should follow them whether it's a XP desktop, Windows Vista desktop, whether you're using VDI, if you point them all to the same place, whether you're using terminal server and things like that. So I can have those settings follow me no matter where I go to. And if you can successfully virtualize all of your apps, then those application settings aren't inside your profiles. You don't need to share profiles between those machines, but you still have the user experience follow them around. I'll just open this up again. Hopefully I'll give you an idea of what this looks like inside the bubble. So as you can see in the real file system here, I don't have an Adobe folder, so I don't have Adobe Reader installed. And if I go to my Y drive, I can't actually get to it because I'm outside the virtualization environment. I can't see inside that. But if I go inside, see there's the Adobe folder there. So that's the file system redirection happening. And I should be able to see inside my Y drive. And that's where my application is actually installed. So I've installed this Adobe Reader to Y drive, so there's no file system redirection having to be in place for that application. So there shouldn't be that performance hit for that redirection. Let me just flick back over to my Vista client. All right. What I want to show you now is I've got Adobe Reader 8.1.1 deployed. This won't be and I want to upgrade to the latest version, which won't be a big jump. It's only going to be 8.12. But I want to show you how I sequence an application, deploying that newer version, and also rollback as well. So just find my machines. Sorry, it's a little bit slow. Disk is chugging away here. Alright, this is my sequencer box. So this machine that I'm actually doing this capture on, just as it would do with MSI captures, this is would be lowest common denominator. So this would match what I typically have out in my environment. So I've got an XP box, Service Pack 2. I'm also sequencing on lowest common denominator, which if I've got XP and Vista out there, then I should sequence on Windows XP, so that if an application that has requirements that are in Vista but not in XP, I can capture those inside the bubble and move them across. The sequencer itself is pretty straightforward. But what I'm going to do here is open this package up for upgrade, and this would be if I was to upgrade to a new version or I was to patch an existing version. And I've just got to grab my software and copy it across. I think those gremlins have struck. Sorry, say again? The current 4.2 client works on 2000 Service Pack 4 and above, not NT4. 4.5 will only be supported for XP Service Pack 2 and above. So 4.5 is the first real Microsoft developed version. So of course they're only going to support the OSs that they actually are in current support cycle. Sorry? Everything. So 2000 server, 2003 server, so this would be for your terminal servers and things like that, and 2008 server as well. This stuff is probably really for user type applications, so this is not going to virtualize your web apps, it's not going to help you with things like SharePoint or anything like that. So this is really only your client-side application deployment. Apparently Microsoft are working on a way of virtualizing things like SQL Server and Exchange Server and things like that. So maybe in the next X number of years we might see that as well. Yeah, well, iOS 7 makes some big strides in configuration over earlier versions. That it's, you know, site's much more portable.
Practically, where is the Y drive as well?
The Y drive is mapped.
Is it local or is it a remote drive?
No, it's local. It's mapped into the cache file for where all the applications get used by the user. They get cached into this single file that's available across the machine. So even though two users may not have access to the same applications, both of the applications that they've used get cached into the same cache file, and that's just mapped to the contents of that file.
So then you're also picking that up and things as well. So if you have 10 people use the same machine, so you end up with 100 gig files.
Yeah, you can. There's nothing really within the administration stuff at the moment. There are a lot of really good third-party tools and scripts for cleaning that type of stuff up. Hopefully in version 5 we might see some good stuff. All right, I'll copy this across, and this is what my virtualized application looks like. I've got my cache file here. I've got this is an OSD file. It's basically an XML file that defines the application that I've virtualized. And if I have an application, say Microsoft Office, that has multiple apps within it, then I'm going to have a file defining each application within that. So I'm just going to open that up. Actually, I'll just step back a bit here. With just on that Y drive, in the sequencer, because I need to actually install to Y drive, in my sequencer it's just another partition or another hard disk that's created inside that, because when I'm capturing I need to actually install it to that Y drive. So the sequencer is installed on here, the client is not actually installed on the sequencer. It's just going to ask me where I'm going to unpack it to. Now I've got a Adobe Reader 812 installed here that I've scripted. If you're doing this type of stuff, really good thing to do is script your application so you're not sitting there doing everything manually. And if it comes time that you put an application out there for UAT and you need to have some issues with it and you need to go through this process again, if it's scripted, it's going to save you a lot of time. And hopefully we should be right. Okay, so we got some information defined for this application. So a package name, where we're going to deploy it from. This server URL just becomes a environment variable on the client machine. What operating systems is this application targeted for? So I might have an application that doesn't work on Vista or doesn't work on Terminal Server, and I can only make sure that this application is deployed to only the OSs that it's supported on. So even though that application might be deployed to that specific user, it will only be available to them depending on the platform that they're on. So if the application doesn't work on Terminal Server but works on desktops, if they log into a desktop they'll see the icons. If they log on a Terminal Server they won't see the icons and won't be able to execute the application. No. Yeah, and that's no OS 10, no Linux either. All right, we're going to monitor this, and I'm just going to kick off the install command, which will do all the stuff for us. So I'll go ahead and do that, and this is where we watch progress bars go across the screen. Probably some best practices here if you are looking at this type of stuff. Everyone's got their application documentation up to date, don't they? Yeah. At TFL, that's probably been the hardest part, is getting the information on the applications and what they do, how to install them, what dependencies they have, and that's really been the what slows you down when doing this type of stuff, because if you don't know anything about the app, you've got to go back and find out about all this stuff. So you've got to find the person who knows a bit about the app and ring around and find all those things. So the more documentation you have on the applications, the better. Also, what I'm doing in this Adobe Reader here is I'm disabling the updater in the application. So there's a lot of apps that have updaters built into them, which is just not going to work in an OS virtualization environment. Even though the user virtualized inside this, the user might have admin access to it, we don't want an updater automatically going and patching this application for us, because we want to keep version control. And if we go and have an application that runs an updater and might work for one user but might break everything for everyone else. So we've had quite a few apps, and there's lots of them that we just can't turn the updaters off, so we've had to do some tricks to make sure that they don't work. A lot of, yeah.
How do you handle licensing?
Licensing for apps. A lot of applications require activation. So Office, for example, its activation is tied to the hardware. So if I'm virtualizing that, if I was to activate it inside my bubble, it would be activated for that user because it would only sit inside their package. If they go and move that to a new machine, that application now says this is not the same hardware, and away you go. It also means that every user would then have to activate it. So where we can, we've got to get the version of the app without activation, and that's very difficult. So really frustrating dealing with development houses that build all these activation type bits and pieces into their applications and won't give you a version that doesn't work. It does mean that some applications just aren't candidates for virtualization. Okay, now the application's installed, it's actually upgraded the old version to the new version. I'm going to stop monitoring here. You'll see at this point it says processing reboot tasks. So any of those apps that need to do some registration or file in use, things like that, because it's virtualized, it just handles that reboot process for us. And it goes ahead and does all the good stuff. If we need, this is some files we might add into our, so any dependencies. So this is actually the Windows installer dependency. So we can, we have an older version of Windows installer. We can actually bundle up the newest version of Windows installer inside that. And now I can run this application. So it's done the monitoring, done the discovery, and this will bring back a list of applications that it's found. So it's found all my file type associations, and I can go and edit those if I want to. It's found where the application's installed and what my OSD file, my icon and things like that. Now if I go and launch this, this is where it does some profiling at this point and sees what's required to get the application started. So at this point I'm looking at giving it the bare minimum bits and pieces that are required to get the application started and onto the box, so we can get down to the user quicker.
How does what would handle errors? Say, for instance, you take part showing package, but you forget a major part of it which you don't realise they maybe used to use it. Would the application just produce an error, or would the client recognise that maybe that bit's been forgotten and pick it up from?
No, there'll be no smarts in the client to say you've forgotten this. You'll probably just get an application error. This is where your documentation should be up to date. All right, so now we've got our new version of our application, and it's been updated. And I'll just flick back over to my SoftGrid server where I've already done all this, so I don't have to copy everything backwards and forwards. So here's, I just did a bad thing. Okay, so here's my existing Adobe Reader 8 package, and this is my 1.2. And I've got my shortcuts. So where am I going to publish the shortcuts to? My file associations, who can get access to it, and so on. and my package file here, and where that's located and it's going to stream from. So in here I can add a version. I'll just browse to that. And I've got my 812 package here. There's my new version here. It's asking for a path. So now I've got my old version and my new version sitting side by side. And if I go and run this on the client, so we've got 8.11. Oh. Sorry if you can see that. So if I went and close my see if this is going to respond now. Oh dear. Oh yeah. All right. Let's close that one. And I'm just going to watch this shut down. Make sure it shuts down properly. Now this new version, even that if you can see that, it actually says 100%. The new version is actually streaming down in the background.
Is it download everything or just the things that's changed?
In this instance, it'll probably reload everything. It would depend on the application and how it's sequenced. If it was an application that I was installing a patch into and only a few bits and pieces had changed, then probably only that type of stuff would copy back down.
Is it possible to release the packages or versions to different groups? Like imagine if you had 5,000 or 10,000 users.
Yep.
You're not going to deploy.
No, you might have a UAT. You're doing a version upgrade, and you might have a UAT group before you deploy it generally.
What kind of server performance hit would you get if you released a new package that's 20 meg for 10,000 users? I mean, say you release a new version out. It's
Yep.
100 meg, everybody first thing that comes to mind is open out.
With the back-end infrastructure, you can load balance that amongst several back-end servers. You would need to put those behind a hardware load balancer, but you can spread that load out. You're probably not going to get every single user launching that application at the same time.
No, I mean, an example, you upgrade to 2007 Monday morning, everyone comes in, you've got 600 users or 1,000
Yeah.
users coming in. First thing they do is put their machine up and launches Outlook. That's the very first thing they're all going to do. Presumably that's going to, you can either schedule that, or that's just going to create a performance hit that first time when everybody opens it.
If you're using a virtual application server, you would have to have that load balanced in the back end. If you would integrate this into Config Manager, you might be able to handle that a little bit differently. So if I now go and check Adobe Reader 8, there we go, we've got version 8.12. Now exactly the same, I can roll this back. I can go and delete that version. And if I wanted to have multiple versions still deployed out there, I would have to have multiple packages deployed to different groups of users. Sorry, say again? How reliable? Yeah, if the soft-grid client crashes, you're obviously not going to run any of your virtualized apps. We have seen client crash in terminal server setups, and there is some tuning that you need to do in that setup. Desktops, you're really not going to so it'd be that much of an issue. And desktops, if it does crash, you can just go and restart the desktop and away you go. Obviously in a terminal server environment, that's a little bit different. Restarting the whole terminal server with multiple users on the box is a little bit difficult. And there we go, we've got version 8.1 back on there again. Sorry? 5 minutes, okay.
Are you restricted to hardware on machines? Say, for instance, Adobe CS3, you need minimum of like a gig of RAM.
Yep.
If your desktop client, say, has, I don't know, 512 meg of RAM, would your virtualized environment be able to pull, if you want to do some like basic tasks, be able to pull the application you're thinking it's got?
No. Whatever requirements that application has installed physically on the machine are what you would need to do in your virtualized environment as well. Yeah. Any questions on those demos? Does that all make sense?
I've got a few clients who tried some virtualization before and had some problems with like applications for like 3D stuff. Is that any better now? So things like 3D Studio have just 3D applications.
Because those apps are executing locally, they can use whatever your local resources are.
So I mean, you can do, for example, full 3D Studio and
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not like deploying an application via terminal server or Citrix, things like that. It will use your VDU, your GPU, everything that is local. Quick word on Operations Manager. With R2 and SoftGrid 4.5, there's a lot of really cool integration coming with this. Operations Manager supports all the standard streaming server, as I was showing you there before. It also supports local delivery, so we can take those applications, deploy them via bits, so that they can trickle in the background and not use all your bandwidth, and you can resume your trickle if you lose network connection. Also supports remote differential compression, so that if there's whatever changes, if you're updating an application, only those changes are delivered. You don't have to re-deliver the whole application. And MSIs, we instead of streaming this to users, we can bundle this up as an MSI and deploy it to the machine just like you would do standard applications. So we're taking advantage of all the good stuff we get with application virtualization, but we're taking out the streaming and we're getting everything locally on the machine. Takes advantage of your branch office deployments, so with your distribution points with Operations Manager 2007, a desktop can be a distribution point, so we can drop those applications down onto those remote sites. And also Config Manager supports deploying those applications over HTTPS, so over the internet, which is pretty cool. Licensing, that's always fun. SoftGrid comes as part of the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack for your desktops, so you've got to have software assurance for your desktops to get this stuff. It's very, very cheap though. I couldn't tell exactly how much, but I think it's like $25 US per seat. And for terminal servers, it's a different licensing setup, and you buy it for how many seats you have for your terminal servers. As I was saying before, there's Microsoft not the only ones doing this. Citrix are doing this with Presentation Server and XenApp. This stuff I think is really cool. If we've got some time, I'll show you how this stuff works. Symantec bought Altiris a couple of years back. The Altiris stuff, well, Citrix, Symantec and VMware, all their stuff is basic redirection only. They don't take advantage or don't do anything like SoftGrid does with the wide drive. So all of their stuff, if we've got really big apps, there could be a performance hit. So you might get better performance out of SoftGrid because of the way they approach this. So if we've got a second, I'll show you some of these others. One of the really cool things about the Citrix stuff is it's all, you deploy just the same as you would do an application with Presentation Server. But what it can do, it has some smarts in there that says If the client can't, if the application can't be streamed to the client, then deploy that application from the server. So with the Citrix ICA client, so I've got a user who has a laptop, doesn't have the application on their machine, and they're accessing the corporate resources from outside, so somewhere on the internet. I can't stream that application to it because Citrix don't currently support streaming over HTTPS. So I'm not going to be able to stream that application to the box. I can still access that application over the ICA client. And it's got nice integration into web interface and their client. The same client or the same interface is actually used to, if I can show this. So this Word is being accessed via from the terminal server, whereas Adobe Reader will be streamed to the client. The Semantic or the Altiris one. Good thing about this is it comes in a free for personal use version. And what's really cool about this is it's a great way to get around time-locked software. So it's got this reset layer here. So we've got something that expires in 30 days. When it comes to day 30, you just go and reset the layer and it sets everything back and you've got 30 days again. It's really good. But if you want to have a look at application virtualization, and you want to do this without having to spend too much time on setting everything up, have a look at the Altiris stuff. It's freely downloadable. You get a key and you can run it on your home machines. And it's pretty cool. So with there, see, there's no Adobe folder in here. Nothing up my sleeve. I'll go and activate this layer, and this should refresh. And there's my Adobe folder there, and I can go and execute Adobe Reader from inside that. And lastly is VMware, who bought Thinstall just recently. They're coming out with a new version, much like the Citrix and Altiris. It's just basic redirection, but their approach is their approach is actually clientless. There is no client needs to be on the machine to run a virtualized application. Plus, the virtualized app is in a single executable. So this. Just going to accept my license here. Deploying applications to the box with install, it's just a single executable. I just point the user to or a shortcut to that location, and away we go. It also supports simple version upgrade and rollback as well, which is pretty cool. Where'd my thing go? That's it. Hopefully give you an idea of what application virtualization does. I think over the next few years, I mean, virtualization's been around quite a bit, but over the next few years, this is going to impact developers too. I think they're going to have to rethink how their applications or fit, how they're going to fit in with this. This is a really good way of deploying applications, actually managing applications right through that life cycle, so deployment and retire and all that type of stuff. And has a lot of good implications, I think, for deploying those apps. A lot better way of doing it. Thank you.